it's working. We're live.
Yay!
Yay!
Thank you so much. So, thank you, ma'am, for setting it up, and let's start this. Super excited. This is the first jam of this new year, and the 87th of our series. This is like the first and interesting session. So, I'd request everyone who is joining for the first time, or as well as the old community members, whoever wants to, turn off their videos, who don't want to be there, seen on live on YouTube. But we would love to see your lovely faces, and we would love to interact. So please keep your videos on, and we will be also recording this session and capturing some screenshots or bits for social media later on. So yeah, that's the GDPR part. And to introduce to all the newcomers, new joinees, what Wednesday Web Jam is. It's a group of individuals, peoples who are clumsy innovators, compassionate facilitators, ignorant experimentalists, change makers, broad-minded design thinkers, cheeky co-creators, and of course, hungry learners. So I welcome everyone to this first Wednesday Web Jam of this year 2022. And I hope everyone is safe and healthy. And I'd like to introduce to our speaker. Before that, I would want to share the motto, which is failing forward, and there's no other way. So be kind, be nice, be empathetic, and I would love to have your interaction in form of questions in the chat box, or turn on your mic and ask questions. And we also have backstage for 30 minutes after the end of the session. So you're most welcome to stay back and ask questions. So Matt will be there. And just to give a bit more information about Matt, we have Matt Wallaert, who is chief behavioral scientist at Frog, and he is also an author and technologist. He has been a multi-exit entrepreneur, a product expert, and he also has a lot of other side ventures. So I would love Matt to, take the stage, explain a bit, and start the session. So over to you, Matt.
Hey, everybody. I love introductions, what people choose to focus on as they like try and describe my somewhat checkered past. The easiest way to understand is I started my career as a social psychologist. I was an academic. I studied how people behaved in the world. And when I left academia, I built and sold a couple startups, went on to become the head of behavioral science at Microsoft, and then the chief behavioral officer at Clover Health. And these days, I'm the head of behavioral science at Frog. For those that don't know Frog, it's sort of the world's leading design agency, more than a 50-year history. It designed the prototypes of the original iPhone and Mac and the HBO Max app, and a bunch of things you use every day came from designers at Frog. And so Frog has continued to evolve, as I think all product and design folks have, right? It means something different now than it meant 20 years ago. And so in the latest evolution, we're focusing on behavior change, sustainability, and inclusion. And so I lead our behavior change efforts to make sure that absolutely everything we build changes behavior, because that's the core idea of behavioral science, right? What we're going to talk about today is behavioral science. And the core idea of behavioral science is that everything we do to change behavior. The point of a chair is to get you to sit, right? Now, or to buy it or to look at it. But the chair that you would make to look at it is very different than the chair that you would make to sit, right? By defining the behavioral outcome that we want, looking versus sitting. Oh my God, now I'm huge. How do I get everybody else back? I don't want to see me. Let's see everyone else here. Look at this. All right, there we go. Now I can see you all again. The chair that we build to look at is very different than the chair that we build to sit, depending on what our goal is. And so behavioral science, applied behavioral science, is about centralizing behavior as the point of everything that we build. And what that unlocks is the most beautiful thing that humans have ever designed, as far as I'm concerned. The most powerful thing we ever made is the scientific process. Running experiments and then generating knowledge from those experiments that allows us to create change in the world is this really elegant thing that humans actually invented. It's something that is particularly unique to humans. And so we're going to use behavior as an outcome, science as a process, as our mantra for what behavioral science means. And the reason I want to be clear about this is because it's sometimes when we hear something like behavioral science, we think, it's, behavior out, it's science that's done in a lab somewhere that we then apply in the world, right? We read these papers and then we apply them. That's not what I mean by behavioral science. I'm in fact trying to get you all to actually incorporate science in your daily work. And I think we all can do that. I've said before that, I've been the chief behavioral officer, the head of behavioral science at big companies, but everyone can be a behavioral scientist. I fully believe you could be a behavioral science janitor, right? I would like to imagine that if ever anyone assigned me to the janitorial services department, that I would be the person being like, okay, well, what happens if I mop it this way, right? What happens if I move this trash can? Do people litter less or more, right? There's a million things that we can do in every part of our life to change behavior. So if we think of behavioral science at the top level, behavior is an outcome, science is a process. We then break it down into 4 steps, right? Strategy, insights, design, and impact evaluation, experimentation, right? And the best analogy that I've ever found so far for communicating this process is science fiction. Because I want to propose that every single one of you is a science fiction author. What do I mean by that? Right? If we're going to use science as a process, we want to create fictional worlds, meaning when we make something, we make it because the world that we have is not the world that we want, right? And so until we make it, until we change the world, that world is fictional. So we have to start from a place of fiction. We have to describe the world that we want, this fictional world where people are behaving in the way that we want, right? Once we have our articulation of that world, that goal, and I'm going to talk more, we're going to go through each of these steps as we go. Once I understand what world I want, well, now I have to understand the first part of science, what we call observational science, which is to say, well, why do I not live in that world, right? And that's really 2 questions. One, why is this world attractive? Why would anyone actually want to live here? Why is this a better world than I have today? Right? If everybody's sitting all the time, why is that a better world than I have right now? And then, given that that's attractive world, well, why doesn't everybody live in that world? Why aren't we already there? Right? We think of those in science as what we call promoting pressures, things that make a behavior more likely, and inhibiting pressures, things that make a behavior less likely, and they compete. And so as we strengthen promoting pressures, the behavior becomes more likely. As we weaken inhibiting pressures, behaviors become more likely. And so we actually have 2 levers for changing behavior. So we have to observe the world to understand, okay, hey, why are we in this world? This is very different from a lot of the research that happens today. So if you go to a design agency today, many of them incorporate observational research in their practice. I agree. Many of them incorporate research into their practice today, but it's often what we think of as foundational research. They're trying to immerse themselves in the space that they're in. So they'll do things like generate personas. Often they have very clever names, right? They'll be like, this is Sam, like he's 25 and he lives in an urban environment and works here. Like there are these flushed out ideas of these imaginary people. In reality, there are only 5 personas I care about, and they're the same 5 personas across every project I work on. Always, never, sometimes, started, stopped. Always, never, sometimes, started, stopped. We're going to go into those later, right? When we get to sort of the insights, we're going to drill into the insight space. So now we understand, here's the world I want. Here's the world I have. I have to build something, right? In order to get those close together, something has to change to move those 2 closer together. I have to build some sort of bridge. Now that could be a physical product. It could be a digital product. It could be a service. It could be a policy. It can be lots of things that help bring those 2 closer together. But I need to build some sort of bridge. And that's design, right? This is the thing that's probably most well understood in the world is the process of going out and building things. But we'll talk about some key differences in behavioral science about how we use this design step and connect it to our previous research to make change more likely. But just because we think we built a bridge, right? We have a world we want.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Can I talk?
I don't know. Sure, go.
What do I, as a Pakistani designer, can design as inclusive as it can get for the next billion users?
That is a huge question. I appreciate your question. Here's what I'm going to say. Let me get through a little bit farther on, and then I will make sure that I call out a place where we can answer some questions that aren't directly relevant to what we're working on right now, but I promise you we'll get to come back to it. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
Awesome. Okay, so we have the world, we've described the world we want, right? We understand the world we have. We've observed the world we have. We've tried to build a bridge in between. This is where many people stop. They're like, cool, I understand the world that I have, so this bridge will work, right? Nah, that's not science. So we have to do the second part of science, experimental science, right? So we have to put some people on that bridge and see when they walk across, do they actually arrive at the world that I want them to arrive at, or are they going off in some other direction? We have to test, right? So that's that impact evaluation. That's that last step, is making sure things work. So we're going to describe the world we want, strategy. We're going to understand the world we have, insights. We're going to design something in between, and then we're going to do some kind of evaluation to make sure that that design actually gets us where we want to go. And each of those has a formalized deliverable that we use to help us focus. So in this strategy bit, lots and lots of companies will tell you that they think they know where they want to go, right? But they often can't articulate in a formal way, right, what that is. So we're going to use the chat extensively, by the way. So because we have a ton of people, I'm going to suggest we're going to do a lot of chatting. So bring up your chat. I'm going to put something in the chat. This is a behavioral statement. This is a formal articulation of the behavior that a company is trying to create. And you're actually going to create lots of these. They're nested, right? But let's start at the very top level. And I'm going to use my favorite canonical example, Uber. This is not an endorsement of Uber. Travis is a massive sexist, and I hope he loses all his money. However, they did have a pretty clear behavioral statement. So who is the target audience for Uber? Who is Uber for? Who is Uber for? Please use the chat. This is not a rhetorical question. Typey. This is your moment. Lazy people. Lazy people. People who need a ride. I like that. Car owners. People without cash. People who need transportation. People who need, okay, us. I'm going with everyone. I'm going to take the everyone. This is very rare, by the way. I used to run Microsoft Ventures. People would pitch me startups all the time for funding from Microsoft. And lots of people would tell me their product is for everyone. But in reality, most products are actually not for everyone. Uber is a rare exception. I think Uber, if a chicken could figure out how to dial an Uber, they would drive it across the road. They'd be like, get in the back. They do not care, right? Like if a baby could figure out how to order an Uber, they would put it in the back. They do not care. They are willing to transport anyone, anywhere. And this is pretty unusual. They have a very large potential audience. But there are some limitations, right? So when what must be true for you to take an Uber? What must be true for you to take an Uber? What are the limits on taking an Uber? Again, let's use that chat. You have to have the internet. 100% right. Daniela, if you are not connected to the internet, you cannot order a Uber. I can't go out in New York City and stick out my hand and an Uber stops for me. That is not how Uber works, right? You need money, right? And you need a very specific kind of money, right? Dana sort of called it out. You have to have some sort of electronic form of payment. Now, this is not true in every market. It is true in the US market, however, right? There are other parts of the world where electronic forms of payment are not so ubiquitous that they actually have to accept non-electronic payment. I gave a talk in Ukraine. I got in the Uber, went to the talk, and as I got out, the guy was like, "You pay me now." I'm like, "What do you mean I pay you now?" And he's like, "Well, you pay cash here, right?" And it turns out because electronic payment is not pervasive enough in that environment, right? Daniela says in Buenos Aires, you pay cash, right? So you've had to introduce cash in places. When they originally launched in the United States, this was a huge limitation because about 15% of adult Americans did not have an electronic form of payment at the time. They literally, physically could not use an Uber because they couldn't do that because they didn't have an electronic form of payment, right? Not everybody had a smartphone at the time. At the time, you could actually order an Uber by text originally, interestingly. They have to be somewhere that there are Ubers, right? I grew up in very rural Oregon. Do you think there's a lot of Uber drivers driving around rural Oregon? Not so much, right? So there are some limitations. So when people, right, who have an electronic form of payment or where Uber services have, a smartphone with connectivity, et cetera, want to what? What is the 0-1 reason, right? The motivation to take an Uber. Now, I want to be clear. there are lots of things that influence our desire to take an Uber, right? But this is the 0-1 thing that must be true in order for you to want to take an Uber, right? When we do a behavioral statement, we are always thinking in the binary. You must either 0-1, you have a phone or you don't, right? You either have connectivity or you don't. You either have money or you don't. You either have a digital form of payment or you don't, right? You're either physically able to get into an Uber or you aren't, right? There's no halfways on these. So what is the 0-1 thing that must be true? Some of it said earlier. Yeah, I want to have to go from somewhere. If I don't want to go somewhere, there is literally no reason to take an Uber. We can come up with some edge case like, putting my baby to sleep or something. But like in general, the primary motivation is, hey, I want to go somewhere. So when someone who has all these limitations are true, want to go from point A to point B, they will what? What's the behavior that Uber wants? What does Uber want you to do? Use Uber, hail an Uber, book a cab. So it's kind of a trick question, right? And the reason that it's kind of a trick question, and this is why we do this exercise, is in reality, most of those are too general, right? If I just open the app and that's all I do is Uber satisfied. No, right? Even if I book a cab, even if I book an Uber, are they satisfied? No, because I can still cancel it. Right? I can still cancel it. The ultimate belief that they care about is taking the Uber and paying for it, right? That's their ultimate behavior. And it actually matters that we get this specific on the behavior that we want. Because if you imagine, if I was the head of Uber and I said, okay, we want people to book Ubers, cool. I could go realign the whole company towards booking Ubers and we could lose massive amounts of money. If none of those people actually took an Uber, right? Let's take it really literally, right? Let's say Danny, I'm just calling out names. Let's say Danny is like the head of marketing, and he's been told, all right, your mandate is to get people to book an Uber. He's like, cool. I'm going to run a promotion where they get 99 cents every time they book an Uber. Great. So the whole world books an Uber, so they get 99 cents, right? Everybody books an Uber, but then they all cancel and we lose a bunch of money, right? People take these conditions that we set very literally inside of companies. And that's what creates all of the sort of churn that we see inside of companies, where one set of folks are running off in one direction, one set is running off in another direction, because we're not specific about what we want. Now, we do want people to book an Uber, by the way. We do want them to install the app, open the app, right? Like we want all of those things, but they are subordinate. That's why I said we're going to make multiple behavioral statements. I only care about booking an Uber because it leads to people actually taking the Uber and paying for it, right? And presumably, if I turned out that those were not correlated, I would no longer care about booking Ubers, right? This nesting ends up being very, very, very important because what it allows you to do is lead with autonomy and accountability, right? What it means is that I can say that, who am I going to pick on next? Gretchen, when she starts at Uber as our summer intern, I can say, hey, you know what you're in charge of? You work in the marketing department. The marketing department has been tasked with getting people to install the app. That is the thing we're holding the marketing department accountable for. You, all the way down here, 7 layers from the CMO, 8 layers from the CMO, you are in charge of getting 20 to 30-year-old female identifying people in LA to download the app. So I can restrict the population, right? But that allows you a zone of autonomy. You now can do whatever you want within that, right? Because I know how I'm holding you accountable, right? I'm holding you accountable for app installations among a particular population. That specificity helps us manage up and down the chain. And it helps us stay aligned. At Frog, it helps us stay aligned with our clients. I cannot tell you the number of times you get 6 to 8 weeks into a project and you realize that you and the client have been talking about completely different behaviors the whole time, right? Because you didn't spend this time up front to really decide, hey, what behavior are we responsible for driving? And it may be one of the sub-behaviors. It may be downloading something. It may be something different. All right. So I'm going to put the thing back in the chat because we've said so much in between, right? So now we have a complete behavioral statement except for one thing, right? We know when someone who is physically able to get an Uber, has an electronic form of payment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, wants to go from point A to point B, they will take an Uber as measured by what? We have to measure it somehow. right? This is the true specific definition of the behavior, right? It could be payments made. It could be rides. I like that, Jason, you're putting in a rides per month. I like this idea of, hey, it's a time, right? Because here's the thing. The thing I would do to maximize rides per month is very different than what I would do to maximize, for example, rides per day or rides per minute or rides per second, right? For example, I might say, hey, I'm just going to try and get everybody to take as many Ubers as possible on weekends. I'm just going to ignore weekdays, right? I'm only going to try and get everybody to do them on weekends. That would create a massive glut of demand on weekends and not enough supply to satisfy it, right? Huge problem. They actually care about things more like smooth demand curves. So they care about rides per day more than they care about rides per month or rides per year, right? Because they don't need to concentrate it all in one period. That's actually quite bad for them. So being really specific about how we actually go do this is really, really important. A couple more things on strategy before we move on to insights. This isn't just useful for product and design folks. It's useful for everyone in the organization. One of the things that you find out about early Uber is their marketing department was really well aligned to this behavioral statement. And so when they went out and advertised, they were very clear about like, hey, we've removed a limitation, right? We've expanded the area. Now we can accept cash. Now we can do these things. They were very clear about like, hey, we are making changes that remove limitations to open ourselves up to a new population. And we'll talk more about that in the next section. There are other things that are useful if you're in business development, right? Or strategy, business strategy. It's another place where it's really key. One of the things this can do is tell you, for example, who are your competitors and who are your collaborators that you might not be thinking of. I'll give you an example. In the early days, Uber and Netflix were locked in a death battle with each other, but neither one of them realized it. Why? Why? Well, what does Netflix want you to do on Friday night? What's the behavior that Netflix wants from you on Friday night? Stay home. That's right. Stay home, watch a movie, chill, right? What is Netflix and chill? I love that this is now a term. What does Uber want you to do on Friday night? Go out and preferably get drunk, right? Because we want you to go out, but go out in a way where, hey, you can't drive. So hopefully to an urban center where parking is a pain in the butt, right? Where you're going to be drinking, right? Where you have to take an Uber back because then I get you both ways. Well, that means they're locked in a death battle because you can't do both of those at the same time. Now that's now resolved, right? Because Uber has Uber Eats. And so Uber is very happy to deliver you some food while you're watching Netflix and chilling. And you can stream Netflix on your phone. So you can, watch Netflix in the back of the Uber, right? There are those who have expanded a little bit. Exactly, Ezekiel. But in the early days, they were competing with each other. It also tells you potential partners, right? Who else wants you to stay in on Friday night? Who else has that behavior? Well, Domino's, Snuggies, television manufacturers, right? TV people want you to stay home and watch that big giant TV that they just sold you. The first job talk I ever gave, happened to be at Netflix. I got invited to talk there, and they gave me a tour of the facility. And there were 2 full floors that were just televisions, just TVs. And I was fascinated by this. And they were like, hey, we have really deep partnerships with the television manufacturers because we want the same thing they want. We want you to have a great viewing experience on their TVs. And so they actually give us TVs, and we test those TVs about 6 months before they come out on the market to make sure Netflix looks really great on them, right? Again, because they had that aligned behavioral statement. All right, enough on strategy. Let's move on to insights, which I think is another interesting place. Now, remember what I said earlier. All behavior is a competition between promoting and inhibiting pressures, right? Reasons to do something, reasons not to do something. And we're going to find those out by studying 5 groups: always, never, sometimes, started, stopped, right? So again, let's switch analogies away from Uber to another one of my favorite canonical example, M&Ms. Everyone in the world fits into one of 5 categories with regard to M&Ms. They either always eat M&Ms, never eat M&Ms, sometimes eat M&Ms, just started eating M&Ms, or just stopped eating M&Ms, right? So we call this 3 by 2, 3 stable groups, always, never, sometimes, and then 2 groups that are in a period of change, right? They just started or they just stopped. And those 2 are really, really interesting to us. Now, remember, I said all behavior is the product between promoting pressures and inhibiting pressures. So who haven't I picked on here? I'm going to take Chad and Heather. So Chad always eats M&Ms. Every time there's a dessert moment, Chad is an M&M eater. Heather never eats M&Ms. Never. All right. Now, it could be a promoting pressure difference, right? So it could be Chad really likes the flavor of M&Ms and Heather just doesn't like chocolate as much, right? That's a difference in promoting pressure. However, it is equally likely and potentially even more likely that there are differential inhibiting pressures. Maybe Chad works out a ton and so he feels fine eating chocolate and Heather's like, watching her health, right? And so she's not as comfortable with the calories. That's not about M&Ms aren't delicious. They both love M&Ms. It's just, hey, they have differences in the calories. Maybe Heather lives in a country where M&Ms are harder to get and Chad lives right above an M&M factory. So he just walks downstairs and gets some M&Ms, right? We don't know until we go look. That's why we look at those 5 stable categories when we're doing insights. We always look at always, never, sometimes, start, stop, because that's going to tell us where things are. The reason we do that instead of demographics is demographics may emerge. So it may turn out like, hey, women are more likely to be always, men are more likely to be never. But it's not because they're like female identifying and male identifying. It's because of something else. It might be about socialization or difference in taste or how we're marketing to them, right? It's not really about the demographic. It's about what the demographic changes for their pressures, right? And so that's why we always start agnostic of those demographics, equitably without those demographics, and let those demographics emerge from always, never, sometimes, start, stop. Always, never, sometimes, start, stop. So let's do a little bit of like promoting and inhibiting pressures. Why do we eat M&Ms? What are some promoting pressures for M&Ms? Let's use that chat box. Taste. Taste, it turns out, Dana, I love you. Taste is a very powerful promoting pressure, right? M&M's knows this. This is why they keep manufacturing new flavors, right? They just keep pumping out new flavors. They have like over 30 flavors at this point. Some of them are very not chocolatey, like pumpkin pie and things like that. They're all over the map. Why? Because taste is a powerful promoting pressure. Suzanne, you said one that people don't often say, but I really like, which is that they're shareable. M&Ms are a social candy, right? Which is actually really important. They're an important, that like, I want something, like being able to do something with someone is a powerful promoting pressure. I like eating M&Ms with my 6-year-old because he and I can kind of make them fun, right? And childlike in a particular kind of way that we can't necessarily do as well with like a chocolate bar that is harder to share, right? Something that has to be broken up. The extreme example of this is like a jawbreaker. A jawbreaker, well, I guess you could like lick and then pass, but that sounds probably not great in COVID times and a little bit weird, right? M&Ms are very shareable. They have a great social energy. I love that promoting pressure. Jonathan, you got another one, color. Color really super matters, right? How do we know color matters? Remember, we're scientists, right? We don't just think color matters, we know color matters. We can actually test, and this is a real test. If I give you a bowl of one color of M&M, you actually consume fewer than if I give you the whole rainbow. We are primally attracted to that rainbow colors, to that variety. Think about this. Everybody here has a favorite color of M&M. You know they're not Skittles, right? You know they're not different flavors. And yet everybody kind of has I like the chocolate ones. They're like congruent in my brain. I'm like, yes, like that's the color that I want. I talk about my 6-year-old. He dumps out the whole bag, divides them up into piles, like eats them according to some mystic formula that I don't understand. But like, all the green ones are left over and then he eats those. I don't know why, but we care about those colors. They're really primal. One of the skills I want to teach you is counterfactual thinking. This is a really important science skill. What is counterfactual thinking? Counterfactual thinking is imagining the world as other than it is today, right? And it's something designers and product people do really well. So let's imagine all M&Ms were like all black. Do you think it'd be as quick to stick your hand in there if it was like a big pool of blackness? Maybe because some of you are designers, you'd be like, great, black, fantastic, right? Let's make them worse. We'll make them like puke green or urine yellow, right? Suddenly I'm not so quick to like stick my hand in there and go after those colors, right? If I can change the color and change behavior, that tells me, hey, that's a potential pressure right there, right? Energy, that's a great one. Calories, right? Raw calories is a reason to eat M&Ms. Now, there's lots of you. I'm almost 40, right? There's a dad bod. There's a reason you can only see me from here up. There's dad bod going on down here. Like I got to be careful about the calories I consume. So it seems like a reason not to eat M&Ms, right? Sure. And that's true, right? When it comes in the form of making me fat, it's an inhibiting pressure. But as a promoting pressure, energy, calories is a very real reason to eat M&Ms. When does M&M consumption peak? Mid-afternoon. Why? When we ate lunch, our body metabolized that sugar, right? Blood sugar went up, body releases insulin, causes us to dip. We have that mid-afternoon blood sugar dip, and we gravitate towards high sugar foods. If you don't believe me, think about Snickers, right? Snickers has never once run an ad campaign that said, Snickers, we taste better than M&Ms. right? They've never competed on taste. They certainly don't compete on color or appearance. If you've ever seen Caddyshack, a Snickers is not better looking than M&Ms are, right? What do they compete on? What did Betty White say? Peanuts for power, right? Snickers, it satisfies. You're not yourself if you had a Snickers, right? They lean into the term king. They are very aware of their peanuts as a satiation, caloric-oriented thing. They actually advertise their caloric value, right? So energy is a very real reason. Lauren, I love nostalgia. That's another one, right? Brand created reasons, like M&Ms are not neutral. They have it's childlike. There's a fun thing I've been doing recently that I've discovered where you can do this fun quiz, right? Where I can say, okay, the green one, like, is his voice high or low? People are like, oh, it's low, right? Is he smart or dumb? Oh, he's kind of dumb, right? How do you know this? What kind of M&M is he? Oh, he's a peanut M&M, right? Like, it's not green, actually, he's yellow. See, this is how tired I am. You can't do talks in the morning, right? It's the yellow M&M. We know these things. The green one is female and she's smart. She wears glasses. How do I know this? Because of branding, right? I have been educated through commercials about the gender of my M&Ms, the gender identity of my M&Ms, their relative intelligence level, their relative energy level, right? All right. Now, there are some other ones in here that I'm going to argue are not promoting pressures. So Dana says, for example, hey, quick is a promoting pressure. There's lots of things that are quick to eat. It would be very quick to eat these AirPods, but I'm not going to eat them, right? That's not a reason to eat an M&M. What quick is, but we're going to come back to it, Dana, because I think that's right. You also said cheap. There are lots of things that are cheap. This paper towel is very cheap. No, not so much. Probably not, right? No, my energy is not from M&Ms. Sorry, I got to scroll down and figure all these out. Maltesers. I love Maltesers. All right. So now, here's let's have a fun. Oh, shape. Shape is definitely one. Brahenda, absolutely, right? Like we have what we call mouthfeel. If you ever work in food science, right? I actually believe, I've never tested this, but I believe that if you made M&Ms, even if you just removed all the sugar and they didn't taste that good, I'd still eat them because they feel so good when you crunch on them, right? You could make them actually dramatically less caloric and I probably would still eat them just because they feel good and fun and crunchy, right? Like it is that mouthfeel thing, right? And the reason I love peanut butter M&Ms, we obviously know these are the pinnacle to which M&Ms aspire. They should have just made peanut butter M&Ms and stopped, but it's partly because of the size, right? And on the that mouthfeel. But here's the thing. I can see, I don't know what this grid is. Let's see here, 5 by 5. Look at that, 25. Okay, so I can see 25 of you who are on camera right now. And I know there's other pages. None of you are eating M&Ms. Why not? They're delicious, beautiful, caloric, well-branded, like all the things. Why aren't you eating M&Ms right now? You don't have any. Heather, there's a good inhibiting pressure. Right? Availability. That's a fantastic inhibiting pressure. Time, right? Both Suzanne and Yuan said, hey, it's not the right time. There's a context. Oh, there we go. Here, Rob. See, this is what we needed, right? But why is Rob eating M&Ms? Well, that's a combination of promoting pressures and inhibiting pressures, right? Other people on a diet, it's not the right time, calories, right, can exist on both sides. There's lots of things that could exist on both sides. But actually, Rob demonstrated something really important, which is this. Most of the time, when we think about increasing a behavior, we gravitate towards promoting pressures. So if I went to you and I said, hey, let's go sell some M&Ms, you'd say, great, let's introduce new flavor or do a branding campaign or we'll do something fun, we'll change a color, we'll blah, 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 blah. We'll do a bunch of things to make that really fun and interesting, right? Here's the thing. In reality, there's a whole other side of the equation. If I was magic right now and I could snap my fingers and there were M&Ms on all of your desks, do you think at least some of you would be eating M&Ms right now? Probably, right? Probably. But notice that's really crazy. I didn't change the promoting pressures at all. They're no more caloric, delicious, well-branded, any of those things. I just changed the availability and that changed your behavior. It's because we have a systematic bias in how we think about behavior. We think about get people to do something more, promoting pressure. The same exists on the other side, right? If I said to you, get people to stop smoking, you'll say, taxes and we'll ban them and we'll run advertisements and tell you how bad they are, et cetera, blah, 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 blah. But here's the thing. How do we really get rid of smoking? At least in the US, we banned advertising, right? It's one of the few products you cannot advertise in the United States. You can't advertise them on TV, you can't advertise them on billboards. This is different. I remember in my lifetime, you could drive down the highway and it was like Marlboro ad, Virginia Slims, like they owned every billboard in America. And we banned that. We removed the promoting pressure of smoking. Hey, you can't make them look cool. No more Joe Camel, right? All those things had to drop away. And as they dropped away, right, the inhibiting pressures that we were adding, taxes and other things, dramatically reduced the behavior. So we always want to be looking on both sides of the equation. That's why we're explicit. I want you to literally physically go out and, put an up arrow, put a down arrow, and really drill in. Rob and I are not in cahoots, by the way. That was totally coincidental. Rob's just awesome. It's all it is. There are tons and tons. The history of M&Ms is actually fascinating. I love that Sarah Jane just linked to it. I would argue that M&M's success was actually about inhibiting pressure. So the story of M&Ms is they were stolen from Smarties, really. Although the M&Ms folks get really mad when I say that, man. But it's true. They were stolen from Smarties. When the M&M founder, the Mars founder, observed soldiers eating M&Ms in the war and went, those make an interesting shelf-stable project. So it's not that they were more delicious than chocolate bars, like a Hershey bar that was available at the time. It was self-stable. Steve asked which war. I believe it was the Spanish Civil War. So they were over, a bunch of Americans went to Spain and that's part of the Spanish Civil War, and they saw people eating Smarties, right? They do melt theoretically at high enough temperatures, but not as readily as a chocolate bar. Right? They don't get smushed like a chocolate bar would, right? And so originally M&Ms were not actually sold to you and I, they were sold to the military as part of MREs, right? Meals ready to eat, they were part of rations, right? Because they were very shelf stable. And we take for granted a world in which, there's climate control and air conditioning and other things. But at the time, they sat in big warehouses that, were not as sort of stable as we currently have in environments. And so it was those inhibiting pressures. They don't melt, they're easy to portion out, they don't get crushed, that actually made them attractive. Not that they taste better, not that they have better branding, right? All that stuff comes later. And so M&Ms are sold on inhibiting pressure. Let's see here. Kind of running short on time. I will pause here, and I promise I want to leave lots of time for questions. So as we move out of the insight step, right, we're going to do that always, sometimes, always, never, sometimes, started, stopped, always, never, sometimes, started, stopped. However, I'm going to remind you, someone took issue earlier that I said, hey, personas are not about demographics. Cool, for sure, right? But if you're making my Sally the Striver personas for me, right, you are deliberately misleading people because you are adding in pressures that don't exist. Stick close to the science, stick close to what you can observe, right? And we're going to take that forward into the design step. So we have all sat in design brainstorms, right? Some design thinking session where people just start spewing out ideas about things that we should do. And then magically, then we do some dot voting. That sounds like fun. We're going to vote on those ideas with some stickers, right? I love dot voting. Who doesn't love dot voting? And magically, generally the suggestion that rises to the top is the one suggested by the most senior person. It's magic that everybody endorses the thing that's been endorsed by the boss. That's not science. That's not how we do things. We're going to take these pressures and we're going to bring them forward into the design step. So when Martin and I get in a room together and he suggests something, my first question is, and hopefully he does it already as part of his suggestion, what pressures are you addressing? Are you saying we're going to do this so we increase promoting pressure, reduce inhibiting pressure? We're going to connect it really clearly to the evidence that we saw in the insight step, right? So it's not a good idea because it sounds good or it sounds sexy or it sounds like fun to do. It's a good idea because it's based on modifying the pressures that we understand that came before it. Does that make sense? Right? And that means what that does is create an egalitarian playing field, right? Where it doesn't matter if it's the boss's suggestion or the janitor's suggestion. What matters is it's clearly derived from what we saw before, what we observed in the world, right? And this has additional benefits when we go on to the next step when we're testing. Because here's the thing. So let's say we think price as an inhibiting pressure is a really important inhibiting pressure, right? We believe price, based on our evidence, Price is really important. So Anna suggests a way of reducing that inhibiting pressure. Michael suggests a way of reducing that inhibiting pressure. And Freya suggests a way of reducing that inhibiting pressure. Now, if all of those work, hey, price is probably really important. If some of them work, right? So let's say Anna's works, but Michael and Freya's don't. Well, price probably matters, but it's hard to move. And we need to spend some time figuring out the right way to reduce that pressure. And if none of them work, hey, price might not be as important as we thought it was, right? Everybody talks about this flywheel, this cycle, right? Wanting to run experiments that teach us so that we can do them better next time, right? That failing forward we talked about earlier. A key part of that failing forward is drawing these pressures forward throughout the whole process, because then we can loop back on them. We could say, hey, none of the pricing experiments work. Pricing may not be as important as we thought. Some worked and some didn't. Hey, it's probably important, but it's hard to move. All of them worked. Cool. It seems like it's easy to move and it moved people's behavior. Let's really double down on that, right? So we're learning from our experiments and bringing that back into the pressures as we continually go through this loop of sort of observe, design, experiment, observe, design, experiment, observe, design, experiment. So I promised myself that I would try and leave 15 minutes for questions. And so I have buzzed through to the 40 mark. There are lots of things I didn't say. There were lots of objections and questions along the way. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to answer all the questions as you go. Surface them now. Ask me anything you want. So let's use the chat so that we can sort of stay in the right zone. The first question was the person who came off mute to ask a question, which was about sort of how do you make breakthrough products that affect very large numbers of people. So breakthrough products that address really large numbers of people often are about reducing inhibiting pressures. Why? Well, it turns out, remember I talked earlier about there's this human bias that we over-focus on promoting pressures. We want people to do something more, inhibiting pressures. We want people to do something less, right? Well, it turns out there's another special feature of these pressures. So think about M&Ms. Claudia's eating M&Ms because she's hungry. Danny's eating them because he just saw a commercial. Prakash, hey Prakash, what up, man? I know you're here. Prakash is eating them because he's sharing with a kid, right? They all have different reasons for eating them, but they're all affected by availability, and they're all affected by health, and they're all affected by cost. It turns out that inhibiting pressures tend to be more homogeneous than promoting pressures. And so when we're trying to create products that affect really large numbers of people, we want to focus on inhibiting pressures because those tend to be homogeneous or cost a larger group of people. If you look at the work that we did in Microsoft, right? Microsoft almost never creates something that makes you really consumer hungry for it, right? The iPhone, right? It's not known for its sort of promoting pressure oriented things. Instead, what it's religiously been about is reducing inhibiting pressure. We want to make people as productive as they can be. So we're just going to consistently make things easier, right? Across as many things as possible. And that's been their strategy since the beginning. And it's worked very, very well for them, right? Top 3 books. Mine. No. So I do have a book called Start at the End, which regurgitates all the things you've already heard in greater depth and is fun and has lots of cursing. Top 3 books that aren't mine. My undergraduate advisor is a guy named Barry Schwartz. I think his book, Paradox of Choice, is a really strong one. I really like, partially because it gets people to think about this counterfactual world. What does a choice-reduced world really look like, and what could that mean and be? There's a book by Tim Wilson about the adaptive unconscious called Strangers to Ourselves, which I really like, for those of you that are sort of geeky science readers. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to reserve the third for a more generic recommendation, which is I don't read much nonfiction other than science papers, right? As a social psychologist, I still read a lot of literature. But when I read books, I read fiction. Why? Well, remember what I talked about, right? I said that all of us as behavioral scientists, we're all writing science fiction every day, right? We're trying to imagine worlds that are other than what they are. And our closest cousins are writers because that's what they do. They try and imagine a world that is other than the world as it is today. They try and imagine worlds. And so I try to read fiction, and I do this in my everyday life. One of the skills I'd ask you to develop is try and play this game with yourself of how would you change behavior all the time. So if you're on the subway, sit there and be like, what could I do to get everybody to stand up right now? What could I get everybody to do to get off at the next stop? What could I do to get everybody to like give their seat up to the pregnant woman? What could I do to get everybody to exercise at the same time? What could I do to get everybody to laugh? What could I do to get everybody to cry? Just pick a random behavior and think about, like, in this context, how could I create that behavior, right? What could I do? All right. Oh, strategy. So, okay, top 3 books. Can you read the list of it's strategy, right? Behavioral state. The key accountability there is a behavioral statement. You want to come out with a clear articulation of the behavior you're trying to create and for whom. The second is insights. Insights, right? I want to know for each of the 5 key groups, always, never, sometimes, started, stopped. What are the differences in promoting and inhibiting pressure, right? I want that promoting and inhibiting pressure map for each of the 5 groups. Design, right? I want a menu of interventions that I can run and a clear link to the pressures that came before, how they're going to increase promoting pressure or reduce inhibiting pressure, or vice versa. And then impact evaluation or test or experimentation to test those, right? That's that 4th piece. And there I want to come out with something. So we use a standard outcome statement, right? How confident am I that the thing that I did changed direction in this way or changed behavior in this way? How did I measure that? How hard is it going to be to scale? And how big was the change? Was this like a little change, big change, right? Because if you think about the difference between lab science and applied science is just lab science with the notion of cost-benefit ratios, right? Like, you may come with an intervention that works, but it's so expensive and the amount of change that it creates is so small, it's not worth it, right? It's not good for the business, right? Vice versa, you might find interventions that don't work that well, but they're so cheap. Why wouldn't you do them, right? Like, if the change is free, might as well throw it in, right? All right. All right. Ways to reduce power structure influence on IDA process: blindfold, different names, blank face, etc. So here's the thing that I have found. You can do a bunch of, for those that know me, like, oh my God, I'm defocused here. Look at this. All right, come back. All right, perfect. I am fairly rabid about DE and I. What I have found is that by introducing the need for people to connect it to pressures, a lot of things get equalized, right? Because you're forcing people to articulate, right, the evidence that backs up what they say. And evidence is always the great equalizer, right? Now, there are still other things that happen, right? People still might, we still have to select some intervention. There may be dot voting, et cetera. If you find that that's happening, then yes, you want things like, hey, let's do this exercise separately. Let's remove who's suggesting what, right? We can move some of those things away as needed. Although I will say, again, when you force people to provide a rationale that clearly connects to available evidence, you get a quantum leap forward in reducing sort of the richest, oldest, whitest guy suggestion. How do you, if at all, account for people's emotional states as drivers when working with behavioral science? Okay, great. So, Colin, so when I think about emotion, right? Emotion is provoked. It's not random, right? We don't just like walk around spewing out emotions all the time. Emotions are reactions to our world, right? To things that happen in the world, right? It may be something we're thinking about that gets triggered by a memory, like all sorts of things can create emotions, but something happens prior to the emotion. So what I tend to look at is, what are the sort of pressures that are creating that emotional state, right? Creating that emotional state. So for me, emotions are more about signs of potential interventions, right? Or clues to what pressures are happening rather than pressures in and of themselves. Now, that's not to say that behaviors don't predict behavior. They certainly do. However, remember what I'm in the business of doing. I'm in the business of probabilistic change, meaning I have 100 people and I want to get 20% more of them to eat M&Ms, right? I am not in the process of deterministic change. That's what therapy is for, right? So if we say specifically I have to get a NUPA to do something, specifically a NUPA and only a NUPA, then therapy is a much better paradigm, right? It's not probabilistic, it's deterministic. We can directly work together, right, to do this sort of mapping out. And so that's where emotions fit for me. How do you promote something which is not How do you make the not driven by personal desire, make the world more inclusive? So inclusion is a really interesting one. It's interesting that you gravitate towards promotion, right? So my first startup was in personal finance. And I could see in our data, because I had access to everybody's bank accounts, I could see, hey, men are making a lot more money than women are, right? I can quantify the gender wage gap, which exists in almost every country worldwide, right? As far as evidence tells us, the gender wage gap is very, very real. Now, remember I said we have a bias. We want to change behavior. We think it's about promoting pressure. Women on the screen, I need a little help here. Raise your hand if you don't want to be paid fairly. So if you don't want to be paid as much as your male identifying colleagues, raise your hand. Why aren't your hands going up, right? Like, it's a promoting pressure problem. So some of you must not have that promoting pressure, right? No, because it's not a promoting pressure problem. It's an inhibiting pressure problem, right? Women are paid less, not because they don't want it enough, right? But because there are structural barriers that cause women to be paid less, right? So at the time, lean in and things like that were very big, right? Big promoting pressure things. You got to want it more. But we just, very, very quick experiment showed, hey, it's not a problem of women wanting it more. So we actually built something. We built something called Get Raised. And we basically said, we're going to make it as easy as humanly possible for women to ask for a raise. We're going to reduce all the inhibiting pressures. We're going to tell them how much they're underpaid by. It was basically a Mad Lib. So we asked them some questions that filled in a letter that generated a data-driven request for compensation increases. This was fantastically successful, right? 80% of the women that handed in the letter got a raise. The average raise was $7,000, right? For something that took about 5 minutes to generate. Why? Because we didn't say a damn thing about promoting pressures. We didn't try and convince women they should lean in. We just said, we assume you want to be paid fairly. We're going to make it as easy as humanly possible to be paid fairly as we can, right? We're going to focus on inhibiting pressure. So I think the key to making the world inclusive is not trying to convince the world that inclusion is good, right? It's not trying to convince people that inclusion is good. It's trying to make it easier, right, to do the inclusive thing, right, to automate the right thing. And a lot of this is so much of this is driven by structural inequity. We have to have structural answers to that inequity. So I think focusing on inhibiting pressures is really key. Okay, action barrier is simply forgetting. Question, what strategy do you use to not forget, remind yourself and your team of something? So forgetting is an interesting thing for me because the science is very mixed. People are always really surprised. I am reputed for my energy. This is me at low energy and my sort of productivity. I tend to get a lot done. And people therefore expect me to have a lot of Tim Ferriss 4-day work weeky kind of habits, right? You must make lips and use apps and all those things. I don't actually, because here's why. Your brain is majestically evolved to help you pay attention to things, right? If you forgot, there's a reason you forgot, right? And either you need to go address that core reason that's behind the forgetting, right? Maybe it's a lack of promoting pressure. Maybe it's a high inhibiting pressure. But forgetting to me is a symptom, not the disease. So I don't try and cure forgetting. I try and say, well, why did somebody forget in the first place? Is this something I need to automate out because it's not important enough? Or something that I need to find a way to tie to something that's more important, right? So we're going to do fiction. Great point. How about promoting altruism? So interestingly, again, I go back to this is a raging debate among social psychologists, by the way. People still debate this to this day, and they will continue debating it forever, and people will publish new studies. I am firmly convinced that humans are natively altruistic. Natively altruistic. We are a social species. We are natively altruistic. And instead, we have created an environment that discourages altruism, right? It's very hard to be altruistic in lots of ways. People doubt your motives, right? It's structurally quite difficult to be altruistic at this point in some ways. And so I am more concentrated on the inhibiting pressures around altruism than I am around the promoting pressures the majority of the time. That's not to say that altruism doesn't also need promoting pressures. I often think compelling storytelling works well here, right? understanding the transformation that somebody makes to an altruist is key. If you have a chance, cut.com. I think cut.com does a brilliant job. Mike Gaston, who is now left, but used to run it, does a brilliant job of subversively creating things like altruism without explicitly doing it, right? So my favorite example of this is they have a video series. They're very good at series. They have a series that's on like rating. And so they do one that is like, let's rate kisses. And so they have somebody blindfolded and a line of people who kiss them, and then they rate those kisses. What's interesting is in that line are people of both gender identities, right? Both binary gender identities, as well as people who are non-conforming and of third genders. And so nominally what you're watching and what's very entertaining is this guy rating this kiss that he's getting from another guy. But what you don't recognize is this is a guy getting kissed for the first time by another male identifying person, right? Incredibly subversive, incredibly interesting, incredibly disruptive, but couched in an entertaining package that is about something else. And they do this reliably across features and formats. There's a great one on showing that white people in America can readily distinguish between different flavors of Asian food, but cannot identify the ethnicities of different Asian people, right? Again, the package, highly entertaining, right? They do it in a way that's funny. Everybody's laughing on both sides, right? It's very defanged, but you're confronting a very real aspect of Asian American racism, right? Through this wonderful package. So cut.com does a really good job of that, like sort of promoting through entertaining piece. Yeah. You emphasize experimentation, but it's often hard to experiment. I disagree with that statement. I think people make it way harder to experiment than they need to, right? Most of my experiments, most of my pilots take no more than 3 to 4 weeks, are run on budgets in the hundreds of dollars, sometimes the thousands of dollars. Like getting an experiment, right? A low touch, low fidelity experiment that at least allows us to generate some evidence of behavior change does not have to be hard, right? We make it hard. I am going through a process right now with one of our clients where, they have some scientists who want to make this into this big, thick protocol. And they were like, why not this and why not that? And I'm like, you've missed the point. The whole point here is we're just trying to gather more evidence than we had yesterday. I'm not trying to build all the evidence in the world. I'm not trying to build a bulletproof case. What we're trying to do is generate more evidence than we had yesterday to try the quickest, lightest thing that helps us understand a little bit more. And hey, if it's a big bet, we'll do more experiments. We can iterate on those experiments, but start with the lightest possible thing. So that I think is, for me, as you sort of said in the second half of the question, I think it's about inexpensive, easy to implement, quick. Almost always no code, right? I'm a big fan of making fake websites, fake AdWords, like, to test language and things like those are really, really interesting.
Hey, hi, Matt. Just a quick pause. We have to introduce the next speaker and we'll continue this discussion backstage. So just would like, thanks, Nim. Would like to introduce the next speaker, and then we head into the backstage. So Anupa, do you want to invite?
Well, she's here, so I don't need to give an introduction. So Claudia, would you like to talk about your very exciting session next week?
Yeah, I would love to. I will keep it very short. So you see the title already, New Year, New Pitch. So that is a little trigger to invite you to experiment, similar to what Matt explained to us, to try new versions to design and then to experiment. So that's basically I will challenge you to try a new version of the pitch. So that's more or less what you do, and then already test it with a few peers. But I won't say more because you will hear everything and do everything in 1 week from now. And I hope you all join the session.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Claudia. And Matt will continue this discussion, but it was amazing. I think it's amazing start for this new year. And Mem, do you want to walk us through the little post-session things? And then we'll, so for the people who are asking where is the backstage, you just have to stay here and we'll transition into backstage. So don't worry, just stay here.
Before we close, I'd like to thank our team for organizing Wednesday Web Jams every single Wednesday. So this is some of our team members. Some of us are here, some of us are not present. And we would like to show some appreciation for all of us. And please follow us on social media. Just search Wednesday Web Jam. And we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, and we share some links on the chat. And after that, we will move to backstage. So I will stop sharing and let's wave goodbye to YouTube.
Yay, thank you. So now we are off YouTube. So anyone who wants to share anything and or continue the discussions, we are good for like 30 more minutes. So yeah, Matt, if you want to continue.